Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. We're going to take us a look at some of the things in the news this 14th day of June 2012. And many of these items I know caught your attention, but obviously at Inform TV we're trying to give you some more in-depth in your thought process, so when you talk to your fellow citizens, your elected officials, these politicians that are soon going to be flooding the neighborhoods, you have something to put right in their face, plain front and center, and get the reaction. Now, obviously this week, the big headlines in all the major papers, I have the USA Today, I looked at the Federal Reserve report myself, and interesting numbers, disgusting numbers. You know, I've talked here in the past about how we've been in a deflating mode for a long time, yet Bernanke, and unfortunately I said Greenspan was before the Senate last week, it was Bernanke, and but Bernanke has said in no way will they allow any deflation. But the reality is, if you look at the numbers with our global population now of educated people, the internet, that type of thing, the reality is both Europe, Japan, and the United States is going to have to deflate to remain competitive with the developing world that suddenly has access to everything we have. The world has changed, but both finance and our government and our businesses have not come to that realization that we're in a new world. We're in the 21st century, but it hasn't really sunk in yet. And yet, from a standpoint of the general population, the numbers that were in the news this week were very plain to all of us, because it showed that the average citizen had a 40% drop in family net worth. And the interesting thing, if you actually analyze the numbers, the housing market, the numbers they used as the main source of family wealth, still hasn't come down enough. So the reality is, from 2007 to 12, 13, as we're going in right now, that we're going to have at least a 50% drop in net worth for the average citizen. In other words, a massive deflation. Yet at the same time, if we we always hear this comment about a strong currency, if the average citizen would have been paid and purchased having a strong currency going back to the 90s to today, in other words, if you would have been smart enough, I would have been smart enough to say that I want my income to come in the form of gold, and I'm going to pay my expenses, my gasoline, my crude oil, my natural gas, in gold. Just think of the incredible difference we would have talking with euros and dollars and yen compared to if we would have the option to be paid in gold and pay our costs in gold. We wouldn't have had any inflation at all. In fact, we had had the right form of income. Yet, when we look at some of the numbers, one of the things that caught my attention, I also caught it here in the USA Today after looking at Federal Reserve report, the median family net worth dropped to $77,000, but that's without a true value on all these old homes and that need repair, the vehicles need repair, those type of things. And yet the wealthiest 10%, their median net worth actually rose 1.9% or 2% to 1.17 million, 1.2 million. In other words, we've got a lot of millionaires in the neighborhoods, but at the same time, when it comes to sharing income, sharing wealth, and why I've had a piece here on the bottom, 40%, I want you to look at these numbers for some true perspective this week as far as looking at income. And before I jump on that, in my program last week, I took on the Racing Commission, and that they should not have allowed Canterbury Park, a publicly traded company. It's not just owned by the Sampson family, although I think they are majority owners, but it's a publicly traded stock. And my concern was of allowing a publicly traded company, Canterbury Park, and the various casinos totally controlled, monopolized by the Indian reservations around the state, being coerced together. And our legislature and our governor, especially the Democratic Party, is anti-horse, anti-animals, I guess, from a standpoint of let's bring some competition into the market. And I brought up the point of the revenue for this stadium is truly in question. And I'm sure my critics, if you brought anything that up at the coffee shop or church or bar, that guy doesn't know anything. So I did a little further work on this charitable gambling. The 10-year comparison of receipts and prizes paid with percentage change from previous year. Well, the percentage change from previous year doesn't show us a picture, but why you should be on your state legislator and what is going to be your options if these pull tab, these electronic pull tabs don't do the job as they're talking about. Because here's the point I was bringing up. In 2002, these pull tabs, this charitable gambling, that a percentage of this now is going to fund your new Viking Stadium, was at $1,435,000,000, and they had net receipts, in other words, to pay out of $260 million. By 2011, where we're at right now, it had dropped to less than $1 billion in receipts. Now you talk about a major crash in 10 years, going from $1.4 billion to slightly less than $1 billion, yet your state legislator and your governor is saying, we're just going to let these pull tabs pay, and that old Repke doesn't know what he's talking about when we said we should have a Racino at Canterbury Park and the other track and bring some competition into the marketplace. So we make sure that stadium commitment is paid. In fact, that's why I argued here by the team, just like the city of Green Bay did, and with the new players agreement, the state of Minnesota already had 2 football stadiums. We could enjoy a good time unless his economy crashes even more than the critics are saying. But here's the thing, back to net worth and income, and why I tried to bring up who's looking out for the bottom 40%. I don't see anybody looking out the bottom 40% other than Inform TV here, of trying to jar some people to think about what's really happening in our world. Because I was doing some research for you guys to try to give you something unique and interesting to talk to your neighbors and friends this summer around the campfire, or at the lake, that type of thing. Here's a number when I was looking up some information on mutual funds, and I would encourage you to go to punch in Wikipedia the term mutual fund and look at that compared to the hedge funds and some of the other funds that you have some of your pension or your retirement income in. And also click on 2007 to 2012 global financial crisis. Some really interesting reading for all of you as far as understanding the incredible mess we've got ourselves in, and yet many of you plan on voting for that same incumbent that your congressman, your senator is not the problem. If you go to Wikipedia and look at what I'm looking at, here's one of the things that should outrage all citizens, all wage earners, especially in this election cycle, about and facing these incumbents, whether the county commissioners or legislators or congressmen and senators. It's annual U.S. income share of the top 1%. You know, we've heard about it, the wealth of the 1%, but this chart shows you the significance of that number as well as the significance of our time. You know, they don't talk about the Great Recession. The reality is, people, it should be the Great Recession 2 should be the number. Here's what I want you to take a look at here. In 1928, the top percent made 24% of the income. In other words, out of every dollar or every $100, they got 24. And we watch this go down where the top 1%, and obviously as a businessman in a previous life, I understand that yes, we have to have people making more than the common wage earner, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But here's some interesting numbers on this chat. In 28, and obviously remember 29 and the Great Depression leading up and not really coming out till after the war. So we had basically a shutdown period of basically 20 years. We had this drop where in my lifetime, I was born in 50, that the top 1% for the first half of my life from 1950 to 1960 took about 10% more, took 10% of the income. A reasonable basis. In other words, wasn't that the time we got on the moon? And yet now, what has happened with the tech bubble and the housing bubble? We're back once again to the 24%. We're sitting at a number where once again 1% of the population takes $24 of every 100. And so we have 99 people then, if we divide the remaining $76 up, what did they end up with? About 76 cents. So when you're standing in your church or your community and you can do, well, there's 300 in church today or there's 100 in this gathering there, one guy is going to take $24 out every time the rest gets 74 cents or 75 cents. Just think of that. And to think that this is not an issue you should be printing out and handing to that politician when he comes to the door. What are you doing about this? Because it opens up a lot of questions. Shouldn't we be balancing the budget with some of this income? Of course we are. And why do I say here, why are we saying to the population that we just got to have growth? Or soon as we get the tax thing straightened out and the health care thing that the Supreme Court is supposed to get us in June, everything will be fine. Really, people, businesses are at where they're at right now. Why? Because they got paid for facilities. Their customers are tapped out. And that's why they're not investing. Now, if you take an informed TV approach, you would see that the big businesses have to be called on the carpet. This offshore money that they're hiding from taxation, all these techie jobs that Ibuda has, 1 million jobs in Asia, bring those jobs back, use some of that $100 billion money to build factories in America, to build some of these techie gadgets, or at least half of them, if they're going to be covered by U.S. patents, copy and trademark, to get to see that we bring this 24% back to a reasonable basis of rewarding our creative, our productive people that I'm 100% in favor of, always have been, but none of this I-Buddha stuff that we got on right now and not taking care of our average citizen. But the other thing here that caught my attention that should be on the election process when these politicians start coming around is in this background. The U.S. Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission reported its findings in January 2011. It concluded that the crisis was avoidable and was caused by widespread failures in financial regulation, including the Federal Reserve, in other words, Greenspan and part of Bernanke's term, failure to stem the tide of toxic mortgages, dramatic breakdowns in corporate governance, including too many financial firms acting recklessly and taking on too much risk, J.P. Morgan in the news this week, an explosive mix of excess borrowing and risk by households and Wall Street that put the financial system in a collision course with crisis. Key policy makers ill-prepared for the crisis, lacking a full understanding of the financial system they oversaw and the systemic breaches in accountability and ethics in all levels. In other words, it was fine with your congressmen and senators that have been there for a number of years that all of a sudden, just like in the 20s, the roaring 20s, the one group can put $24 in their pocket while the remaining 99 get 24 cents, or 76 cents, excuse me. But you see where I'm coming from? Where are these politicians? Where are they in looking out for the average citizen? Looking out to see that we have a financial environment in this country that's stable. The other thing I wanted to show you in these graphs was a picture on the leverage ratio for major investment banks. What did banks do? They turned into spec houses. And there continue to be spec houses. In fact, Jamie Dimon's call before the Senate this week was nothing more than the value of money doesn't have enough return to satisfy the needs of that bank, so either they're forced or greedy enough to go in what they build as a hedge, when in reality it was speculation. And the reality, our financial institutions, many pension funds, many people investing today are talking about or investing in these funds of various types that are really just margin traders. They're not investors. We've allowed investment to go by the wayside, and this talk we have about the individual cannot invest. Well, that's not true, but the reason the individual has been burnt trying to invest is the market is totally manipulated by speculators and traders that trade on margin. It's not dollar for dollar investment. What took place in that other chart after the after the crash in 29? They made sure that people made sound investments, dollar for dollar, against sound collateral. And obviously that's why I talk about the housing mess here. One of the things in the personal side, your personal side, or especially your neighbor with a lower income, or you drive around the neighborhood, you drive on the east side of Broadway here and look at some of those old houses. There is no way that those people are keeping up with their 30-year mortgage on the upkeep and repairs those houses need. And if you walk through the neighborhoods like I do to try to wear this belly off a little, you see cars and pickups like mine that are not being maintained to a level. So the reality is the buying power, and it's costing more and more and more for non-return investments or upkeep. When they're doing things on these old houses, they're not getting a return on investment or a return on net worth. Yet it's not being talked about on a national basis, and surely should. In fact, if you're looking at this in the background, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, look at their risk that they took on, just mind-boggling. And yet this chart, if you know anything about trading, this chart does not represent their true risk, because the way things are handled today. I think I've got one other interesting picture that I want to show you there, and that is on housing. We go back in the housing thing of 2000 to 99 to 89, and you look at the average new home sold for $150,000. By 2002, it's up to over 300,000. Just think of that. But yet, from a standpoint of new houses, that is not the problem that crashed us. The problem is of putting all this money in those old houses. If you're fortunate enough to have a good job, good income, got a unique niche, you want to build a new house? Sure doesn't bother me, never did bother me. I built a new house. It is the situation where those houses on a 30-year mortgage are set up with new appliances, new furnace, new shingles, new siding, new construction, efficiency on heating and cooling, that'll basically last a minimum of 30 years before they need something. That's not the issue. And as soon as the builders quit building homes, the inventory eventually gets up. And who's buying them? The rich and successful people. I have no problem with that. I'm a true capitalist, but I am a capitalist based on numbers, not on hearsay and innuendo like too many of the people involved in the debate today. There's a few other items in business that I want to look at. And that is, what is the average citizen getting a return on his investment? Now, if you look at the stock market back to 99, even though it's come back, way back since the crash in 2008, but if you left your money in the same stocks, you're even. You haven't made any money. Yet business is still demanding of our Congress and saying, you can't tax us, you can't, you've got to make it easier yet for us to make money. What the chart shows, there are already pigs taking home the money. The charts all show they have massive net worth, and yet at the same time, their businesses that are paid for now or are a shared little monopoly are making 15 to 25% return on investment, while the average citizen in their savings account or their stock portfolio over the last 10 years is making about 1.5%. You see what I'm saying here, people? If we had true leaders in Congress and the White House, what would we have? We could balance this budget, we could eliminate the debt, and we could provide leadership for the rest of the world. Not let this Euro fix, which is a total and complete joke that we're talked about here, and just makes me furious. And that's why I brought up in last week's program the American president. You Democrats, if you really want to save Obama, if he's savable, I think most of the American people have made up their mind already. He's out of there. But send him that DVD and let him look at that movie and let him think about what I'm saying, that Biden needs to go out of there, and he needs a vice president with some true numbers experience, or people that want a third-party president to show that both the Republicans and Democrats, we think you're two miserable, despicable groups that I talked about. what has happened with those true groups? They become special interests, and they have an agenda that serves their minority group that controls these parties, but they do not address the needs of a general society, a general world, or the average citizen, and especially the next generation. And that's why we're fed up with these two political parties that want to be driven with their ideology. I'll give you a little example of my experience with the Republican Party in 2008 when I ran for Congress. Did everything the state required, went to the convention in Moorhead, Minnesota, went through their venting process, and there the Republicans told me, well, we've got some things that we want you to address or talk about, and I talked about them, and they tried to say, well, we've got guidelines above state law. How can political parties be above state law? They're not. They only use that to be bullies to push their agenda. And when it came to a candidate, that there was only two candidates running in a day-long convention, and when it came to having the two candidates speak, they decided right before lunch that, well, why don't we let the candidates speak? And they cut it down to 10 minutes from my opponent, Glenn Menz at the time, and myself, when I approached the podium, they said, you're out of order. And I looked around to 140 delegates. They're, quote, supposed to be the leaders in the party and leaders in our community. And they said nothing. They called a point of order when the chairman of that political convention in Moorhead, Minnesota, in, I believe it was April or May of 2008, you're not welcome at the podium. I said, I just want to talk for 10 minutes. And you're out of order, Mr. Repke. And I said, well, I'll talk for 5 minutes. And I wasn't raising my voice. I was just a few feet from the chairman. And I'm looking at all these delegates there. And none of them stood up for a point of order. We've got a political convention going on here. Why won't you let this candidate that was approved by the state of Minnesota, the Secretary of State, meets all the qualifications for a congressional candidate, and you, the Republican Party, won't let him speak? And here's what also is interesting. What happened? I went on to get 48%, a little over 48% of the vote, yet was never allowed to give a political speech. And do you wonder why I'm fed up with our political system and our political parties, whether they're Democratic or Republican? As should you. When the political parties, which I say have one function, to find leaders that know what's going on, have the ability to circumvent state law and push their agenda where they want no candidate, I'm in favor of choice, but I'm not pro-abortion. It's a very serious situation. But if there's a problem with the fetus or a one-night stand, it should be an option available to families and women. But the Republican Party doesn't want that, and they believe people of substance and numbers like myself, because I don't agree with them on the abortion issue, cannot speak as a state-approved candidate. Just think of that, people, how our political system has devolved. And you wonder why we have the numbers I'm putting up there, how we have lost our way, that our political parties have lost the context of these political parties have become dictators, and they want candidates that can be their puppet. And they are the slaves of the political parties. People, our forefathers and Lincoln did not set up a democracy to be ruled by these few individual thugs that control these political parties. The purpose of a political party was to find leadership in the community and let them lead, to see that we don't face the cliff and the mess we're facing right now. Thanks for listening to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke.